Okay. Good. You're finally here. So just stay right there. I have one episode already set up for you to watch now. Though we're going to have to watch at least 2 more episodes after this so you can see how a full week of the game works. That may seem like a lot, but trust me. It's going to fly by. This is a great season. It's a lot of fun. It's going to sell you on the show, okay? Trust me.
Which we actually have someone who wants to say hello to you and comes bearing gifts. So why don't you go and greet your friend there?
The Colonel!
Okay, just give me 1 minute to explain. So, to get ahead of everything, I'm about to speak very, very seriously about a show where people get slimed. They have to dress up in costumes ranging from a chicken to a banana to a chicken to a rocket ship to another chicken. There's a robot who comes in and insults people once a year with lame jokes. And you'll often see people unironically telling the camera stuff like this.
It smells worse than a porta potty at the Jersey Shore after an all-you-can-eat wings competition. I mean, this thing is disgusting.
There's no shortage to the number of reasons I'm embarrassed to admit to any soul that I watch Big Brother, and I'm correct to feel that way. If you watch it, you should be embarrassed too. However, at the same time, if I were to successfully corner you in a room to explain myself, there would also be no shortage to the number of ways I think that a bunch of strangers being stuck in a house for 3 months and voting each other out and fighting for power and survival in this made-up game as cameras film them 24/7 is fascinating, engrossing, supremely effective in its game mechanics, and legitimately something that teaches us about people in ways that few other shows can. This is a constant dichotomy that any fan like myself has to grapple with, because modern-day Big Brother is essentially these 2 polar opposite potentials always being at war with each other. In every aspect of the show, from the strategic game, to the tone, to the competitions, to the storytelling, everywhere is a battle between what the show naturally is and should be, and what the people behind the scenes, whether network executives or the show's direct producers, try to force it to become. The end results being it bouncing between either overly simple nonsense that tonally ranges from trashy to campy, and really just airs to fill in empty space in the summer TV schedule without much further thought, to a psychologically interesting, strategic, cerebral social experiment. Watching 26 seasons of those 2 sides clashing, with the latter losing out quite often nowadays, is pretty frustrating. Yet season after season, myself and everyone else who complains endlessly about everything this show does wrong, we always come back, despite all the signs saying not to. Its potential is just too great and too clear. This happens every single time. So to make every future instance of this easier on myself, I just want to have my self-rationalization conveniently organized in video form. Now, to be clear, I'm specifically talking about the US version of the show. I have thoughts on the Canadian version too, but overall it has its own separate strengths and issues, so I'm not going to get too into that. You can make a whole other video on it. Otherwise, we're completely ignoring the many, many other versions of the show in different countries, some of which seem significantly more popular than the US version, but they're even more different, so we're just going to focus on Big Brother US, which is its own animal. Because this series began 1 year after the idea was first presented in 1999 in the Dutch version of the show. That period, the summer of 2000, was when reality television, especially reality competition shows, were very clearly on the rise. Survivor's first season had just started airing that spring and became an immediate juggernaut of TV, so Big Brother was set up well to ride that wave as another CBS show based around players being voted out one by one. Specifically, Big Brother's format was that 10 people enter and will live in the house that isn't really a house, it's something built on a studio lot. There are microphones and cameras everywhere, with footage obviously being used in episodes, but also close to 24-hour live feeds being available to anyone online who wanted to watch them. With that concept of always being watched, tying into the name Big Brother being a nod to George Orwell's 1984. Then, after moving into the house, every other week, each house guest would vote for 2 other players to be put up for elimination. The players with the most votes would be nominated, and then the audience would vote for which of those house guests to be eliminated, until we reach the final 3, where the audience votes for a winner that gets $500,000. Simple as that. This first season of Big Brother aired through that entire summer, on the same channel as Survivor, often on the same night through a period where Survivor was getting at least 24 million US viewers an episode, with its finale being viewed by nearly 52 million. The absolute perfect companion for another new reality series to have to help earn new viewers. Your audience is already organized for you. It's as easy of a layup as any show could have asked for. And Big Brother completely blew it. Because, yeah, when it aired on the same night as Survivor, it did pretty alright. 22 million for its premiere and a lot of 16, 17 millions. But the main issue is that it basically aired 5 other days a week. There are 70 episodes of this season, most of which couldn't even crack 9 million viewers. Because not only is it a ton to keep up with, it's also not like all of that is amazing content. There's plenty of downtime, and the game mechanics don't really shake up the house dynamics much because it firstly happens so slowly. It's 12 episodes before the first person leaves the house, and he was the person adding the most conflict there anyways. And secondly, when being liked by the audience is all that matters in the end, there isn't a ton for the house guests to actively do in relation to the game. Producers throw in a challenge once in a while for them to do as a group for a reward, like getting a certain amount of miles on an exercise bike by the end of the week. But again, there aren't many layers to those. Even the natural human interest of these strangers getting to know each other and having to live together can only get you so far across 70 episodes. Overall, most episodes are just slow-paced, lightly edited slice of life. And then one episode a week is more like a news program than a reality game show, where the host Julie Chen will talk with relatives of the house guests, or psychology experts, or betting experts, to recap and bring in commentary on the events of the week. You could meet the most obsessed Big Brother fans, and odds are fair that most, if not all of them, skipped season 1. It's just not a great television product. Enough so that it nearly was canceled then and there, and was likely only renewed for a second season after it was decided to bring in a few new executive producers, the most crucial of which being Arnold Shapiro, to help make several changes to the show's format. What worked in the Netherlands wasn't going to work in the US. And that brings us to the actual start of Big Brother. Season 2 is revamped with a format where every week there's a competition. A very low budget competition to decide who's the head of household, or HOH, for that week. Whoever's HOH is safe for that week, they nominate any 2 of the other house guests for eviction, and rather than being up to the audience, all of the house guests who aren't HOH and aren't nominated vote out one of the 2 nominated house guests. So like, Mike Boogie wins the first HOH, he nominates Nicole and Cheryl for eviction. Of the other 8 house guests, 3 vote to evict Nicole, while 5 vote to evict Cheryl. So Cheryl goes home. And that continues week to week, with whoever won the prior HOH competition not being eligible to compete in the following week. Except for the last one. Everyone left competes in that one. All the way up to the final 2, where, again, rather than the audience voting for a winner, all the evicted players come back and vote between the 2 remaining to crown a winner. This is immediately a million times more interesting. It's a format designed for power to shift, to cause players to consider, worry, and be prepared for anybody in that house coming into the power position the next week. And the crucial piece is simply having every piece of agency within the game being in the hands of the players. The lack of that is why Season 1 wasn't as strong of a fit with Survivor's first season as CBS thought. In the grand scheme of things, people were just sitting around, talking, cooking, playing games. But now there's actual intrigue to the game, as the social dynamics of the house have greater consequences, people make alliances, make deals, etc. And even more so, it adds to the psychological aspects of the show as people grapple with these sort of power dynamics and having the fate of someone who you've been living with for however many weeks in your hands. Because often, as we see in this very season, when you're in that position, Whether you're one of the house guests voting to evict someone, or especially if you're the HOH who nominated them, you feel like the bad guy, even though this is the position that on paper you want to stay in. And the thing is, people don't like feeling like the bad guy. They don't like feeling guilty, especially with America watching. So they're also resistant to owning who they are within the game and just saying, hey, this game is for $500,000. I'm willing to lie and betray for that. They won't just say it. With the exception of one person.
If you give me your word that if you win HOH, you won't nominate both Nicole and I, we'll keep you here for another week.
All right.
Or we'll keep you here, whatever.
I've promised Hardy and Nicole that I wouldn't nominate them both. I clearly would nominate them both. I would stab them both in the back and leave them to bleed, on the kitchen floor, and I wouldn't even clean it up. And if I did, I'd use a dirty towel and leave it on the bathroom floor.
Everyone else does what's very natural for people to do, which is rationalize and move the goalposts to make yourself feel better. Saying, actually, I'm not really betraying you because you broke my trust earlier, so when you think about it, you're the real bad guy and you deserve to go home. Or, yeah, I know I said before that I was going to play this game just to help one of you two win because you both deserve it, but thinking about it more, I really need this money to help my grandma, so I think I'm going to vote you out and try to win myself, which really seems like the selfless thing to do, honestly. It just continues as people smell the money more and get more and more attached to the power they hold in the game.
There are several people in this house that I feel like I can trust. And when that trust is betrayed, you finally just say, my God, this is just a pit of predators and they're backstabbing, manipulative phonies.
These strongly human aspects to the show are always the most interesting. And it's a major narrative through its second season all the way down to the final two, where someone who's very conflicted on their time in the house in many ways, and because of that is more hesitant to accept their agency in the game for what it was, loses handily to someone who, while arrogant and a bigger liar than anyone else there, is and always was more transparent and understanding in how he played.
I knew you were going to play this game the way you did. Much respect for you. I'm not mad at you. And I voted for you, baby. Congratulations.
All right, I just have to make it official. Congratulations, Will. By a vote of 5-2, you are the winner of Big Brother 2.
By modern TV standards, season 2 is still a bit slow. It was cut down to 3 episodes a week and 30 episodes overall, with arguably still not quite enough strong content to consistently fill that out. But that little bit more breathing room gives the editors time to tell an actual story in these episodes by putting their footage together with more creativity and precision. And I do hold the season overall in high regard. That main storyline of people managing the guilt in the game, which thematically comes up a lot through the early points of reality competition shows, is always fascinating. The strategic game has real footing, especially with its winner taking a less obvious path in that, after a certain point, he actively avoided winning HOH to instead just be a voter or often even be nominated on the block. A strategy that on paper you would scoff at. And tonally, more so than BB1, it lies in this specific sweet spot where it's a serious strategic game, but it's also pretty camp. It's just silly a lot of the time. Like, to sum it up, the climax of the season is at the final 4 head of household competition, where the dominating alliance of Nicole and Hardy are out of the competition after having won the last 3 HOHs. So now their only hope of staying is if Will wins, because as shown before, Will promised that if he won, he wouldn't nominate the 2 of them. So they trusted him and kept him in the game. But obviously, Will doesn't have much interest in maintaining that deal. That's because he's had a building resentment towards the other players since very early in the game, when they flipped things against Will's initial alliance and sent his friends home in weeks 3 and 4, leaving him alone and with no options but to lay low, not win any competitions, look powerless, beatable, and then cozy up to and slowly earn the trust of the 2 people with the most power in the game so that they'll always opt to vote out the other person on the block over him, all while endlessly making fun of them to the cameras and biding his time until he sees an opportunity. So he waits, and waits, and waits, until this moment where after Nicole lets go of her key and she's out of the competition, and it's just down to Will and the current outsider, Monica, a secret temptation is then offered to whoever drops from the competition. And Will, who really just wants an excuse to lose, has already tapped out as I was explaining this.
All right. Congratulations, Monica.
This dooms Hardy and Nicole, who are instantly regretting every single time they could have voted him out, but didn't.
Bunky even said, you're going to regret voting me out and keeping Will in. Well, not even 3 or 4 hours after the fact, I'm definitely regretting letting Will stay here.
I've never had such immense distaste for anybody in my entire life. Ever.
I don't know how I'm gonna sleep at night. The blame rests on my shoulders.
It's what the entire season has been building towards. It's what Will has been preparing for weeks. It's the last big hurdle that the dominant force in the game needed to get through before they were home free. It's the most instant and direct betrayal of the whole season. And as that culmination of the past 8 weeks fills the air with so much tension, regret, and anger, as these two are stewing in the mistakes they made. Let's see what Will's up to with his secret prize.
I must be the luckiest boy in all of the land, maybe even the whole town. I won the Big Brother peanut butter jar.
As the people he's just betrayed are staring daggers at him, just filled with utter disgust for him, he's having so much fun playing around with a giant peanut butter jar, basically rubbing in their faces that he stabbed them in the back for something as lame as this. It's so dumb. Like, Big Brother is both smart and stupid, but at this point in the show's life, those aspects aren't in each other's way. The show has almost fully figured itself out now. The game format just gets a few more adjustments over the course of the next few seasons. Like, in addition to the HOH competition each week, following nominations, there's another one called the Power of Veto competition. Whoever wins that can either keep those nominations the same or remove someone from the nomination block and make the HOH choose a replacement nominee. So in addition to just having another thing to help fill out those 3 episodes a week, it adds variance, lets the power and capital of the house be spread out a little more within a given week, and makes the social game dynamics more complicated to maneuver because now you need to avoid even being somebody's backup target. The week can't be locked down right after the nominations are made anymore. In a few days, maybe the initial target is saved and you could go up instead. So that wrinkle pretty much finalizes Big Brother's format. The few other tweaks, like sequestering the jurors and other stuff, I don't need to get too into the weeds on that or else I'll never stop. Basically, HOH, nominations, veto, eviction. That's the core of how Big Brother works. And as far as these sort of social strategy shows that I know about go, I think it's probably the best format. It forces you to walk such a tightrope where you want everyone's guns pointing at each other and not you. You cannot afford to avoid managing the trust of some outsider, because even if everyone else in the house is with you and the odds are in your favor, in some crapshoot competition, there's always a chance that the one person who you ignored ends up winning, and then you're on the block. And when you're on the block, people start talking about you. And when people start talking about you, information comes out. Maybe things you've said to this person, but not that person. Or things you said about that person to this person, etc., etc. And then your game could quickly fall apart. In comparison to something like Survivor, which has a great format in its own right, but just for comparison with the core, early stripped-down format of that, where everyone in the tribe votes to eliminate one player, if you have a majority alliance and you maintain all the trust within that alliance, the group pretty much has the game on lock. If there's someone on the outs who thinks you're in charge and wants to target you, there's not much they can do if you've managed your people well. That's because each round, power is spread out equally among the players in the game. Each player has one vote, and that's pretty much it. One player will win immunity, but they don't necessarily earn extra power with that, only safety. So there, you can more confidently set up a structure and ride it out. In Big Brother, though, power is a mobile entity that's purposefully designed to shift week to week. Any attempts to always keep that power fully within your court will require much more running around. Because the overall game kinda does evenly distribute power, just in a very different way, in that there's a brief point each week, after the eviction has happened and the prior head of household no longer has any power, where everybody else is in the same place for, on average, maybe like 20 minutes. During that time, any one of them could be the next HOH, and there are countless different directions in which the week could unfold. Only once the next HOH is crowned does the power distribution become wildly uneven in a completely new way. You have to maneuver through all those uneven power structures, but do so while always accounting for those 20 minutes at the end of the week. Have everyone's guns pointing at anybody but you.
As soon as Kaser won head of household, it looked like everybody had, that deer in the headlights look. Like, holy moly, I can't believe he won. I'll tell you what, this is a game now.
Everything can change on a dime. So having nobody in the house ever targeting you is the absolute optimal way to play. But it's not the only way to play. People are not robots, and frankly, few players are able to pull off what was described. Everyone in the house trusting you more than they do anyone else would be absurdly impressive to manage. So beyond that, strategies can range from creating a secret alliance between two people on opposite sides of the house so that they can have all the information and always work their separate sides to keep each other safe, to taking the risk in outwardly targeting a person so that should anybody else win HOH, they'll think, well, I don't need to target this person because we know who they want out and it isn't me. To being a perpetual pawn who's always nominated but never voted out because you aren't threatening. To actively floating between whatever alliances are convenient to you each week. To drawing a line in the sand between two alliances and hoping for the best. To pushing hard with game theory to explain what feel like more objective reasons for whoever's in power to target someone else. There's endless possibilities. So the game itself is strong, and all the wildly different people playing are what make it something that can be replayed over and over again and not get old. The core of Big Brother is honestly kind of perfect. And the people running the show clearly disagree. The first big hang-up and point of frustration with fans is that as the years have gone on, the show has clearly not had faith that the staple format of the game is interesting enough on its own to make the show worthwhile. So on many seasons, they'll add in a twist or two that lasts for a few weeks to maybe even half the season, which the producers feel is something new to keep the season interesting and feeling fresh. But, we'll get to some examples in a bit, they almost always majorly hinder the game and thus the show. Like Big Brother has pretty much always had twists of some sort, even in the early seasons, but in the early days, they were all casting twists. We have stuff like BB4, where a handful of people were put into the game with their real-life exes. Or in BB5, there's Project DNA, where they actually had identical twins secretly tagging in and out of the house for the first half of the game, before both being able to join separately in the second half if they survived to that point. They also somehow found half-siblings who had no idea that each other existed until they were talking in the house and pieced it together. Which is kind of fucked up for the show to orchestrate, but it's interesting. Ideally for me, I think the show should always be made up of complete strangers on an even playing field in that sense. But I see the intrigue to these sort of casting twists, and especially as a way to advertise the show. Big Brother fumbled its chance to be a major hit, so it had to still work to gain new viewers after season 1 and have some sort of hook. People weren't going to be enticed just like, oh my god, they're finally using the number 5? So I get those, but less so with twists that adjust the actual game format, which just so happened to start coming up after Arnold Shapiro, who pretty much made the show what it was, left Big Brother after its first All-Star season, season 7. Looking at the years beyond that, we have twists where everybody is tied to a partner in the game, and if you want to nominate someone, you have to nominate them with their partner. A twist where the house is arbitrarily divided into teams, and if someone on your team wins HOH, then you're safe too. Sometimes there's a twist or an extra competition that lets someone name a third nominee, even if they aren't HOH. and it's become increasingly common for players who are already evicted to re-enter the game via competition or twist or vote. Or most egregiously, there is a thing called the Battle of the Block, where every week starts with 2 HOHs who each make separate pairs of nominations. And those pairs then compete in a different competition to earn safety and dethrone the HOH who nominated them, leaving the other HOH and noms as the ones who stick through the rest of the week with veto and eviction. Let's get into how terrible this is. Big Brother's format is made so that if a majority alliance cannot be torn apart by someone's social maneuvering or natural distrust in the group growing, there still remains the strong arm option of one person outside that alliance winning ahead of household competition and targeting that group. If there weren't cracks in the alliance before, there are now. But with a twist like this, there are so many hoops needed to jump through in order for somebody outside the power structure to even make a dent in that way. You would need to have yourself and a close ally win both HOHs for that week, then be willing to together nominate 4, potentially even 5 people if the veto is used, from the opposing alliance, which significantly limits the options you have for trust you can build and inroads you can make into the group that you need to ensure someone goes home from, while also ensuring that they split apart in the aftermath rather than every single one of them being united by the fact that they were nominated. And even outside of that type of scenario, the twist in general pushes against targeting powerful players. Someone being nominated from the jump will have 3 separate chances to save themselves: the Battle of the Block competition, the Power of Veto competition, and then the eviction vote. If you want to not be the HOH that gets dethroned that week, then you specifically want to target players who are weaker in the competition aspect of the game. But then that also means that they're less likely to win the Power of Veto to remove themselves from the block and give you the option to renominate a bigger target in their place. It's a total rock and hard place position, and makes it so large alliances are likelier to stick together, especially if it's made up of the big strong guys who are more likely to be good at any given competition. Which, wow, shocker, that's exactly what happened. This was season 16, where they kept this twist going for 8 damn weeks, and made it so that basically the whole season was a straightforward, boring, 97-day-long steamroll. But at least it ends there.
Coming up, I'll reveal a fan favorite twist to the house guests. One of the biggest and best game changers played out last summer. The Battle of the Block.
Fucking God. They just don't understand, or more likely, they just don't care. Because it's the same thing with a lot of these twists. A competition that allows a third nominee means that even if the majority alliance doesn't win HOH, as long as one of them wins the next competition and gets to pick that third nominee, they should be able to just vote out that person instead of who the HOH nominated. One person re-entering the game after being evicted practically every season just de-incentivizes players from taking a big swing because they fear that work will come undone. Having teams just limits the options and possible moves available for a player to make. Having everyone be in a pair does that even more so, especially if, as players thinking about the game would logically do, an alliance never includes 2 people from the same pair. That way, should any one of them be nominated, they can just vote out their partner who isn't in their alliance. Even the small twists that only last a week or 2, or just a single advantage that one player wins, Big Brother will still operate under Murphy's Law to an extent that is frankly worthy of applause. It's all poking holes in the natural strength of the format. Every time we see one of these twists sour an outsider's HOH win, or lessen their chances of turning the opposing alliance against each other, it's that core game that was refined for its first few years, desperately fighting against what I guess could hypothetically be people on production earnestly thinking that they're making the game more exciting with a fresh coat of bullshit that they slap on each season. But more likely is just the result of network demands. It's just so apparent that in CBS's eyes, Big Brother is an easygoing, malleable filler show. Its biggest strength to the network is just that it's cheap to produce, it fills in a lot of summer time slots, it lasts for several months, and has reliable viewership. Like when the 2008 writer's strike happened, CBS decided that, okay, let's just make 2 seasons of Big Brother this year. When the recent writer's strike happened, they said, okay, let's make this season longer and last 100 days, and then had this weird spin-off season for the winter. It's something that can bend however the network needs it so long as it keeps doing what it's doing. So that's a priority. Put the show on autopilot, just make sure you do X, Y, and Z each season, with one of those points clearly being that they have 2 or 3 new twists to forcefully inject interest, and also a chicken costume. Make sure there's a chicken costume somewhere. I feel like that's where Big Brother has solidly been since at least season 18 or 19. And it's currently on 26, by the way. Big Brother production seems to operate under these sort of strict rules, and that constrained feeling often extends to even more layers of the show than you'd expect. There is an element of Big Brother that doesn't even want to be a reality show. It wants to have control over itself. It wants to have set, easy narratives that a consensus casual audience will enjoy. You can see it in the casting, the diary room sessions, and in these same twists. Like, firstly, with casting, all reality shows pay attention to archetypes and formulas to some extent. If they notice that a particular personality type has made for good TV before, they're likely to want to recapture that. And in general, you need a variety of personalities, and often ones that will clash and create conflict. But there's still so much range to explore while accomplishing all that. And with Big Brother, most of that range gets ignored. It leans much more on casting archetypes and idealized storylines for them than the average competition show, I think. Very directly, season after season, you'll see the young, superfan, nerdy guy who will always start off clumsy and awkward, but has a real shot if he can find his footing in the game. The fast-talking southerner who always seems happy and spews nonsense country phrases. The long-haired, surfer-type, friendly-seeming jock. The person who plans to keep secret their prestigious career in law or politics or something like that, so the players underestimate them. The former undercover cop. The token gay guy is often a showman. The really gorgeous woman who's actually much smarter than people assume. All that many times over. And of course, when you look at the multiple examples within each archetype, they're all still people, so obviously they're not the same. I could go on with plenty of differences between Ian, Steve, Cameron, and Corey, you know? But the show probably prefers that they practically be the same. People are put into the house less so with the experimental aspiration of, let's drop these strangers in a pressure cooker for 3 months and see what happens, and more so having these specifically desired storylines, dynamics, and relationships, or showmances, or what it's called when a couple forms in the house. So if archetypes were more or less the same, then great. They'll be getting what they already deemed as reliable narratives, and it's easier for the people working on the show week to week to know what to expect. They know how to present this type of character to the audience, and there's less that they have to adapt to.
I am the new head of household, and I cannot wait to get this rodeo started.
This competition is more slippery than a greased hog at the state fair.
And you can bet your bottom butterbeans I'm gonna fight like hell to stay in this house this week.
This sort of spoon-fed unreality to the show is seen even more blatantly in the diary room sessions that players have. It's this show's version of the confessional, the talking head, where people speak their thoughts alone directly to the camera. In early seasons, this was very much a place for players to let their guard down, speak candidly, recap, and think through events that occurred recently in the house. But gradually, it's instead become where they have to put on their TV face for the producers. Like, just look at how people's posture in there changes over the years. Before, players would get comfortable, settle in, lean back, maybe even lay down sometimes as they speak. But soon, that casual nature disappears more and more. Now they're usually still sitting up straight, still higher energy. They'll still have their TV personality turned up to 11. And often their volume too. There's a lot of yelling in there. Just take the general vibe of DRs like this.
I hoped it was Roddy, but Jason felt that he was protected because Roddy said he was not going to come after him.
Jay, you have my word on being straightforward with you.
If you brought someone in a room and said, you know what, I might nominate you, they're going to tell you anything or say anything to make sure that you don't do it.
And contrast it with something like this.
My man Jason busts through the doors and he's coming in hot. He's asking me all type of crazy questions, and I'm just trying to defuse this guy, do a little bit of damage control so he doesn't go crazy like only the bull and win this veto. We gotta get him out this house, especially now that we have the chance.
One of them is clearly a lot more natural. As the show wants more control over itself, the diary room became where they could most easily do that. You know, it's where producers push the Southern archetype to say more of their wacky phrases, and in general make everyone give very direct, scripted lines that I say are scripted nowadays in the sense that when anything of substance is being said in there by a player, they are still explaining their honest perspective on the game. Nothing there is being made up whole cloth. It's just that they're explaining that in the way production wants them to. Like, it's most apparent when a player is recapping a specific conversation or event that occurred. In older seasons, people would describe it all in the past tense, because fucking obviously in order for them to be speaking about it now, it had to have happened in the past. But nowadays, the diary room sessions are often spoken as if this is happening in real time, as if it's their internal thoughts in the moment rather than their thoughts after the fact.
How do you feel about it, Steve?
Generally not good about pawns.
Vanessa, I don't understand what your problem is. Pawns go home in this game. I don't want to do this for you. Please stop putting me in this position.
Right, okay.
Which, in theory, intercutting those DRs with the scene of that event happening could make sense, but ultimately, the simple fact that this isn't how people speak makes it so distracting to me. If people are recapping something, just let them do it how they would if they were actually speaking to another person, rather than pretending they're reliving that moment. When you force the latter, you're kinda requiring these people to do some acting, and they're on Big Brother, they're not actors. Don't make them do reenactments, don't force retakes, don't make them do
It's my birthday, oh yeah.
This woman is an amazing player. A dominant strategic force who played in such a frantic yet calculated way, unlike anyone we've seen before or since. Yet you make her do this. And for what? Fucking God. With a solid 80% of each cast, you're gonna get a loud, but still bland, unconvincing, monotone delivery of lines, some of which are nauseatingly copy and pasted.
So I walk into the backyard.
Walk out into the backyard.
I walk out in the backyard. I walk into the yard.
So I walk into the backyard.
I walk in the backyard.
Best thing for me right now is to secure my safety.
So I really want to win this to secure my own safety. I need to secure my safety.
The only way I can ensure my own safety.
As a BB superfan.
As a Big Brother superfan.
As a BB superfan.
And when watching the show, that leaves us to scrounge for and savor the rare moments where someone's emotions are expressed unfiltered and bleed through the edit. Whether it's an emotional outburst that's too compelling to not air.
Why the isn't he not gonna win? Give him the money, I'm wasting my time right now!
Or even little things like, I always remembered this tiny moment with this person, Paul, who was very good in the DR. They would have a lot of fun with it. But we see a point where, after they tell their joke, at the end of the DR performance, if you will, there's a brief pause, and then we see Paul smirk. Just that. The sign that I really like my own joke. I think I'm hilarious. I'm enjoying myself here. That is much more funny and endearing than whatever the joke itself was. But we don't get stuff like that often. And for the most part, it's another piece of the show put on rails. And don't get me wrong, exaggerating and playing stuff up a bit for the show isn't inherently bad. There are people who have the character and charisma to pull it off. Like several of my favorite players surely weren't coming up with everything off the cuff. And some of my favorite moments are ones where it obviously wouldn't happen this way if people weren't aware that there's cameras. But you don't want it like that all the time, and not everyone there can succeed with it. In fact, a major point of interest with the whole concept of the show is that every facade a person puts up will inevitably drop at some point in the 80 or whatever days that these live feeds are constantly filming them. So they'll show their true colors. They always do. So work with that. Work with the reality of your reality show. And with the idea of a reality competition show wanting things to play out in certain ways, the elephant in the room is the possibility of producers rigging the game to engineer those outcomes. Often when fans aren't happy with results, they'll cry out that this particular competition was only used this week to save this player, or that they added this twist last minute to help so-and-so, or that they're giving information to a person in the diary room, or whatever. And I'll start by saying that Big Brother isn't fair. In fact, it's generally terribly unfair. It's not chess, it's a TV show. However, I do think there are boundaries to what the people behind the show are willing to manipulate, and that very direct type of interference is both outside those boundaries and also just logistically difficult to imagine. Competitions require a lot of pre-planning and setup, so changing them and swapping stuff around as they please wouldn't be super easy, especially nowadays with the larger sets. I mean, this is the production team that used an audio-based competition when a deaf guy was competing. You'd think they'd change that on the fly if they could. As for giving information to certain players, I will say that players often try and sometimes can successfully glean information from the types of questions they're asked or not asked in the DR if production is too sloppy. Like if you're in an alliance and you're never getting asked about that alliance in the DR, it probably means that the alliance is either fake or much less important to the direction of the game than you thought it was. It doesn't happen often, it's not a particularly reliable way for players to gain information, but it can happen, and I think reading into stuff like that all kinda just becomes another part of the game. Now, as far as directly telling players information in private, no, I absolutely don't think that happens. There's definitely room for nudging people in a direction, or asking them more questions about a potential move to get them thinking about it more and considering it more. And of course, there's human error at play with how well each worker on production is at making sure everything they say to players is as impartial as possible. But generally speaking, anything more overt than that, like anything that production actively has to go out of their way to do, I legitimately don't think so. With 26 seasons of episodes, live feeds, postseason interviews, and NDAs expiring, enough damning, convincing evidence of malicious rigging would have come out by now. And for the people running the show, the minute reward of rigging is not worth whatever risk there is to that anyways. It's argued how much Big Brother falls under the umbrella of game show and is thus bound by the strict laws against rigging game shows that have been in place for decades. But even if it doesn't, it would still do damage to the show's credibility and reputation. I've been talking about many decisions likely being guided by executives just wanting Big Brother to stay afloat as an old reliable. And a controversy that isn't about the players, but the game itself, would put that at risk. And all just for the ever so minor boost of the audience favorite winning the game instead of being voted out in like 6th place or whatever. That doesn't do much for them. Letting everything ride its course still does the job. So why bother putting in more work here? Furthermore, if they did rig that directly, if they did care that much to do so, there are so many instances where it would make plenty of sense to engineer a certain outcome, and yet it doesn't happen. If you think production is like that, then shouldn't you also look back and think, wait, why didn't they rig here? 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 A lot of winners are not exactly beloved. There are some impressively dull seasons that you'd think they'd want to inject some interest in. And there are twists that the show put a lot of hopes in, only for it to not work in the slightest. Like in season 12, the host, Julie Chen, had to hype up this twist called the Saboteur. The Saboteur was a player in the house who was secretly put in just to cause chaos and keep the players on edge all season long. She'll rat out people's games. She'll cast suspicion onto the other players. When the lights go out, you gotta be careful, because there's never a dull moment with the Saboteur. Oh, she was the first person evicted. Oh. Shit. Failing like that is just what Big Brother production does. So I don't know how people see the show fall on its face time after time, and yet think that the producers are masterminds who can manipulate everything constantly and get away with it. There's only one notable instance coming to mind that didn't have extenuating circumstances behind it revealed post-season, and this case is very, very eyebrow-raising, and if there's a major exception in my mind, it's definitely that. But overall, oh wait, and Helen was pushed. But overall, there is a line that confines what they control, and what I think is within that boundary that the producers are willing to manipulate in is not Big Brother exerting control over the game week to week as it's happening. It's in how it sets up the game board before the players even start playing on it. The clearest examples of what I mean are the few specific seasons where among a cast of newbies, there is a single returning player, or a pseudo-returning player in Sharif Fields who was well known from playing Survivor 4 times. And in those cases, that person is the immediately recognizable face of the season. And the show is thus invested in that player sticking around. Not necessarily winning, but sticking around. Paul, who I mentioned earlier, was one of those people. They returned in season 19 after having played and been really popular in the prior season, and was obviously set up for success. But the show cannot force them to be immune, or that'd be too transparently bullshit. What they do instead is offer the illusion of choice that funnels the game into a direction where they'll be present for at least a few weeks. In this case, firstly, releasing Paul into the house via a twist, where basically they tell the house guests, if anyone dares to push their button, that person will get a bunch of money, but something crazy will enter the house. It's all vague enough, and with a large enough amount of money, $25,000 I believe, that of course someone would push the button, but it's still technically a choice. So people can say, if you didn't want to compete against an experienced player, then everyone should have just not pushed their button. From there, Paul enters the house, a house filled with people who were already fans of theirs, of course, and the next stage of the twist is that Paul is able to give immunity to half the house. Hypothetically, that's something Paul could misplay by angering those they leave out. Maybe. Somehow. If you squint. But not really, you really just easily earn the trust and loyalty of 8 people. And it doesn't end there either. In the first week, there was an advantage that the audience would vote to give to any one of the players. This advantage gives you complete immunity for the first few weeks of the game. And again, hypothetically, anybody can win this vote. It's in the audience's hands, not production's. But when you think about it for a millisecond, who is the audience going to vote for? One of these people who they just met this week and probably still don't know from a hole in the wall? Or someone who they had just watched for an entire summer and came into the season TV ready? Yeah, it's all done at the starting line, when the producers know where all the pieces will be to ensure that there's a comfortable landing spot for a Paul, or a Sari, or this guy. His name's Jesse. Say hi, Jesse.
Hey, how you doing?
But after that initial setup, I think it's hands off. Producers care about that person making a decent run so that this reliable character and storyline is there for at least a few weeks. But with the endgame results, the winner of the season, they don't care as much about that as the results of all their respective seasons show. The furthest they've gone with engineering a specific season is, again, with a twist that was there from the very beginning of that season. In Big Brother 8, there was this guy, Eric Stein, who was cast under the condition that he isn't just playing to win the game. He's playing as this twist called America's Player, where every week he's given tasks voted for by the audience that he has to complete to earn money. Some of them were fluff, like getting a weird phrase to catch on in the house. But more importantly, he'd always get a task on who to get nominated this week and who to get evicted from the house. And this, while being votes in the audience's hands, really keeps the season in production's control because most of the audience just watches the edited show and not the unedited live feeds. So when choosing who Eric has to target and protect, it can be dependent on who's getting a good or bad edit on the show. So I'd say that one is even more unfair than what I laid out earlier, given Eric was an amazing player who would accomplish most of these tasks and make it far in the game despite essentially playing with one hand tied behind his back. And it had to have been known that he was capable of that. That's why he was chosen for that role. But the thing is, we can still see all of that. Nothing is hidden, nothing's behind the scenes from us. I bring it up because it shows that if Big Brother wants to have continuous influence on the game, there are loopholes to do so out in the open in a way that's still in that zone where it's technically something that was set up from before the season started, and the game mechanics were never changed mid-season, and the votes were decided by the audience, a third party. So you can squint and argue that it's fair. So when something like America's Player is an option, risking malicious behind-the-scenes game manipulation isn't even really needed to accomplish what they want. Like, they actually went on to sort of repeat this twist where 3 people were on a Team America and were given tasks to complete, but unlike with Eric, 95% of these tasks were just wacky fluff content rather than game-related goals. The show could have easily had control of the game in a similar way, yet chose not to. So overall, most twists or competitions or whatever that people cry wolf about, I think were there from the start. And once the game gets going, it's hands-off, barring how the edit can affect fan votes or when they have to adjust on the fly due to unforeseen circumstances, like a player quitting. And here I am defending the game, but it's not like what I'm saying is a glowing endorsement of Big Brother's credibility. There's plenty of bullshit that's worth criticizing, and I'm not saying that there's absolutely zero chance I'm wrong. I just think that there is an interesting line that they're willing to walk up to, and that line is not nearly as far as people tend to believe it is. Because the priorities are way more about ensuring lasting storylines and knowing how to present those characters to an audience rather than specific end results. It's 3 episodes a week. They want to know they have stuff to fill that time with each season. It's all about filling a time slot. And I wish that weren't the case. It doesn't need to set up these guardrails because the game happening in real time, week to week, is, again, a core part of what keeps Big Brother endlessly interesting. On that topic, episodes are being edited and airing as the game is still occurring. Generally, at most, the events of an episode end off 2 days or so prior to when the episode is airing. Wildly different from something like Survivor, where episodes begin airing months after the winner has been decided. With that, editors can know how everyone's journey goes from beginning to end, and how to best represent those as one long-form story. They know which alliances and relationships end up as the most important. They can foreshadow things. They can set a person up as a villain from the very start, knowing that later on in the game, that person will have a big downfall and it'll be all the more satisfying. In Big Brother, though, editors can only estimate what information will be most crucial to air. Like, sometimes a person wins HOH, and there's someone who hasn't been a focus on the episodes whatsoever prior to now. So they gotta play catch up on what this person's deal is. Who do they trust? Who do they dislike? Etc. And with how they present players individually, as heroes, villains, and such, a lot of the time it's played safe because, hypothetically, any of them could be the winner of the season, and thus, should be a palatable character that people will at least be able to stomach seeing win. So regardless of how terrible someone is being in the house, they will often only start getting buried on the edited show once their position in the game has plummeted and they truly seem like they're on their way out the door. Because of all that, even though it's 3 episodes a week, there's a lot that goes missing if that's all you're watching. Which brings us to what makes Big Brother, Big Brother. And that's the live feeds. Having these is like watching a completely different show. It's not truly 24/7 footage, as cameras go down for competitions, nominations, if a house guest is singing copyrighted music, stuff like that. But it's so much that we essentially do see the full story as its reality, rather than edited episodes with inevitably missing pieces. We get what everyone's relationships are, what each person says they're planning, how these differ when they're talking to person A versus person B, which piece of information caused so-and-so to change their tune on a decision, just how terrible of a player is Jim Bob Jones really. We get to analyze everything while still having the wonder of what will actually happen next and how will it unfold. Like, to go back to Survivor, there's obviously strategic game interest and votes where fans will debate whether so-and-so made the right move or not, and that's all well and good, but there are some limitations to that aspect of shows like that in comparison to Big Brother, because first, there's obviously less overall context, but also there's a meta layer to the show that you can view it through. Due to episodes being put together while knowing the end results, scenes are selected and included with much more purpose, as you would with any sort of scripted storytelling. So when you're watching with the awareness of that, you're able to see the writing on the walls in some places. Like I mentioned how they can more confidently have a villainous character knowing that their downfall will come at, say, Final 8. For a viewer, after an episode or two of that person being shown in a consistently negative light, you too can safely assume that, okay, that guy's definitely not winning. He's getting humbled at some point. Or if there's somebody who's been pretty invisible for a majority of the season, you won't have expectations of them suddenly taking control of the game and potentially winning. Like, you don't expect an extra to come on screen suddenly and be the one to uncover that Walter White is Heisenberg, you know? It's just how storytelling works. And specifically, with predicting the winner, there's a thing called EDGIC, simply a portmanteau of edit and logic, where by picking apart what they've chosen to show us, people narrow down which of these people is reasonably being set up as the winner. Generally speaking, that'll be someone who's shown in a largely positive light, has clearly well-established relationships and dynamics with a few other key characters, in some ways ties into the main themes of the season, and whose perspective we usually don't go too long without hearing from, regardless of how necessary their commentary is to the specific events of the episode. And once you have a handle on those sort of things, it's pretty reliable. In some cases, people have the winner clocked by the first 2 episodes, or even just the premiere. And the overall accuracy rate of each season's consensus prediction really dwarfs the few cases where it was a surprise to the very end. In Big Brother, you don't have that. A person who you had forgotten was on the show can win. The comic relief can win. Someone who you hate, better get used to them winning. No fate is fully written until you see the event with your own eyes. So when you look over the strategic landscape of the house, you're forced to consider the full potential of each piece that's on the board. That's something that can be really damn complicated. And that's great. Trying to dissect the countless different paths that a season could go down from any given moment, it's such an addictive brain exercise that, near its peak, there is no show I would rather experience. And even in cases where the strategic game of a season isn't being super active and so there's less to pick apart and anticipate, the live feeds are also where Big Brother strongly illustrates this environment as a microcosm of society. A lot of these shows pitch themselves as that, and it usually fits to some degree, as this group of people are all trapped in their own little world while trying to each succeed over the other in whatever way they can and earn the most money. But Big Brother I've always felt was the strongest example that you can observe because we get to see the warts and all of what comes with that. Since the people are in here for so long and will never be able to keep up the facade of how they want to present themselves every single day.
I have come here to study human beings.
So social dynamics get very cleanly represented here as we act as a third party viewing all their interactions and the inconsistencies that come with that. Often, I think it ends up as a clear display of a lot of the social conflicts within America, as you notice some trends that reoccur in many seasons, even though on paper, all of these strangers are entering the house starting on the same level. Most simply, just looking at the results and cast demographics, you can notice a few things. Like, there's surely something to be said about the gender imbalance among winners of the game. It leans quite heavily towards men. They more often get to the end, more often are awarded the win by a jury over a woman. Just a lot of little stats like that, pointing towards there being an advantage in one direction. And then when you look at the very start of seasons, there are the many instances of the cast being predominantly white, and people of color tending to disproportionately be targeted early, and not as often make their way into the main alliance, the in-crowd of the house. Like, there's one particular season where Julie was interviewing all the first 3 people evicted from the game, and the image is, very striking. In general, it's clear that if you're in any way visibly and obviously different from the majority of the house, whether that be through race, age, sexuality, whatever, you'll have a tougher time succeeding. It was noticeable through a lot of stretches of Survivor as well. People gravitate towards those who seem similar to them. I wouldn't think that's controversial to say. So in this game, it adds a layer of difficulty that might not be astronomical per se. Plenty of people make it over that hurdle, whether through skill or luck. But it's a hurdle that most people in the house don't have to deal with. Those are both points that you could hypothetically notice at a glance. And then when you're watching more and seeing it more closely, further layers show up. Like related to the gender dynamics of the game, I've always found it interesting how the dudes in the house so often come together in the line, while groups of women rarely do the same. Jocks broing down was kind of the stereotypical start to a Big Brother season. The guys quickly consolidating power for themselves, almost instinctively. Yet despite that, it often seems like the thing that puts more fear in people is the mere whisper or possibility of a women's alliance. Again, no women's alliance has ever really stuck. But just the idea of women consolidating power is still an effective boogeyman to use in the game. And expanding on the second point, I'd just like to go into more detail on an example of people revealing their own biases within the game. Because sometimes, someone who's different from the majority of young, white, hot people goes home early, and it was mostly because they were a bad player. It isn't always due to biases or whatever. But they do exist, even in recent seasons where the cast demographics are much more balanced. I think Big Brother, with constant cameras on everyone, ends up making that very clear. So there are a few things you could go into. How this happened, how this alliance came to be. That time the first HOH decided, basically due to what I've already been talking about, that he 100% won't be nominating any people of color or women during his first HOH reign. Of his own accord, he was insistent that this be the case, no matter what, 100%. And guess who he nominated to start? But a very recent case is when there was this woman, Taylor, who was very kind, very understanding, but she was being targeted the first week, and people's perception of her never seemed to match reality. Everything she did was viewed through a malicious lens. Like, those targeting her had this assumption that when Taylor realizes she's in danger, she'll get angry and flip out and yell and all that. She's cocky, angry, rude, etc. We know from the feeds that it was all pulled out of thin air. Like, none of it seemed to be purposeful lies, but none stemmed from actual evidence. In fact, they had the opposite evidence, since during that time she's still plenty nice as she interacts with them day to day. And after she does indeed learn that she's being targeted, she's still really nice. There's no anger, it was mostly just sadness and remorse. But that narrative of her personality ran strongly through the rest of the house and was adopted by almost all the other players. I sure wonder if there's anything about Taylor that would make people so quick to view her as a rude, angry, fiery person. More on her later. Enough cases like that add up where, if it were outside the self-contained box of the game, you would probably fill in the gaps of logic yourself and assume there's some level of valid reasoning to it that we just didn't see. But with all these cameras, and the countless conversations you witness, there's little to doubt. Preconceived notions and biases are attached to all sorts of people, some much more than others, and they can build out to have a large impact, inside and outside this box. Visible parallels go on and on. Even what I talked about earlier, where some people enter the game and are basically handed these huge advantages over the other players, or really any instance of returning players being in the same season as newbies. It mirrors the real world. They're just like those who were born on third base from their rich parents or something. And in this competitive capitalist market where you're trying to outperform others and end up in positions to earn more money, they obviously have a much easier time doing so. But they themselves, and sometimes even those watching it, are resistant to admit the effect that those advantages had and would much rather maintain this inflated sense of self, insisting that everything is fair and balanced, and they just naturally are way better than these other people. Or how anger and hatred and othering the outsiders is such a dangerously powerful tool to control alliances. As when people are only focused on punishing others and pushing the enemy of the hour lower than themselves, it lets them feel big even though they aren't. It keeps them from looking up and logically examining the full picture and thinking, who's truly in control and how will the overall situation affect me later on? If they just assume, well, obviously this sort of treatment will never find its way to me, I'm one of the good ones. It's cruel, but as history and today shows, it keeps working.
If you know, you've seen it happen here. Don't look up, look down. The reason why your financial situation is not as healthy as you would like it to be is because of the people that mow your lawn and deliver your food. It's not because of the people who run the country or the people that own Twitter or the people that own Amazon. It's because of him over there delivering your tacos.
And that's all Big Brother showing sucky aspects of the world, but not to say that all of what I just talked about is present in every individual season, or that they strictly reflect negative aspects. So firstly, I would say that if this sort of stuff is going to happen, it's good that it's visible objectively through the live feeds, and the fact that it's all contained within the box that is this game, where theoretically people should be entering it on an even playing field, yet you often notice these sort of trends happening. There are less ways to excuse it than when you see it in the real world, so perhaps it helps you realize that a lot of those excuses that you use in the real world are actually just that, excuses. Like, I think watching Big Brother has legitimately given me a clearer perspective on some issues, and I'm sure others have had similar experiences. Beyond that, I like that the show has been on long enough now that it can occasionally act as an effective time capsule that you can easily compare to newer seasons and see the positive societal changes that have occurred since then with how differently certain things are portrayed. In addition, it can often capture a time and place when America is in the middle of going through a change, and particularly when Big Brother is doing its job of actually casting a bunch of people from different walks of life instead of the 16 actors from California. It can display the positive qualities of America as this mishmash of so many different cultures and lifestyles. Like, I wasn't watching the show yet at the time of season 6, but I'd have to think it was very notable that in that season, which was in 2005, in the grand scheme of things still not that far removed from 9/11, the show had its first Muslim contestant with Kaysar, and he became one of the most beloved players of all time. He was cerebral, fearless, kind, and unifying. You always hear about people being in complete shambles when he was voted out. Or when he was voted out again. We're not going to get into that right now. And for many viewers, that surely was the first time they saw Muslim representation on TV that wasn't a stereotype or something, and instead was an actual person with depth and nuance and empathy and all that. In bits and pieces, the show can have a legitimate positive effect on the world in that way.
Blindside Butterbean.
Go get the time laser.
Brussels sprouts, bro. Brussels sprouts.
Met the Colonel. I'm awesome with the lightsaber. I'm awesome without the lightsaber. I'm good with my hands. I'm good with my feet.
No, I'm serious. Like, yeah, it's a dumb game show in a parking lot with farts and aliens. But ultimately, each season is also always a story. And part of what makes stories great is that they expand our view of the world beyond what we see in our own neighborhood. The social dynamic side of Big Brother's snow globe society that we're watching play out for 3 months does that plenty. And I'd say that the structural side of that society provides even more clear parallels. Starting in season 6, whenever somebody wins the HOH each week, they have the privilege of sleeping in their own huge room that rests a floor above the rest of the house. It's lavish, it's secluded, and it allows you, in your new position of power, to literally look down on all of the other players for the entirety of that week. From up here, you can see that they're smaller than you. They're less than you. The HOH down to nominee power structure echoes way beyond just the general strategic game of who you're nominating or evicting or whatever. The obvious visual here represents a slippery slope that players often fall down as, even though this is all just within some silly game, a person's behavior and treatment of others can be drastically affected by their position within that power structure. Like with someone being up there as HOH, what repeatedly happens is that someone will get into that position, and even though the game is designed so that it has a harsh time limit of 7 days, the power doesn't take that long to get to their heads. Extreme cases of this are so common that they have a name for it: HOH-itis. When you're the only person who's completely safe, everyone else's fate is in your hands, and they're all coming to you, kissing your ass, giving you info, you start to feel indestructible. Everything is going great, clearly not just because I'm HOH, more so because I'm so naturally amazing. So yeah, I can talk down to people without thinking twice about it because surely they realize that everything I say is accurate. And I can isolate others if I please. They deserve that treatment for going against me. And I can domineer over what my alliance believes I should do this week. Or even go rogue and make some off-the-wall move instead. Or just change my mind a million times and vocalize every single instance of that happening. It'll all be fine for me because I'm... Wait, what's happening?
Cameron, gotta use you as my replacement nominee, brother.
No.
Kevin, take a seat.
You can't do this to me. You can't send me home. This is a mistake. Don't you know who I am? I put the puzzle together the fastest. I won the fart competition. You dare strike at me? Plenty of players have doomed their own games due to how they handled that power and how they treated people during that time, completely losing perspective of what it was like down there and what it will be like when you're down there again. It happens so much that there are still several players on each season who are taking a page out of the Dr. Will playbook by throwing HOHs for at least the whole first half of the game. And sure, that worked out for him, but really, no. Being HOH is a good thing if you're even a half-decent player. Besides getting a target of yours out of the house, which is already pretty good for you, it's the best time to build the trust and pull in allies, to gather info from the other players, and from that gain a more accurate understanding of the overall house dynamics, which, aside from just having generally positive relationships with people, is the most valuable thing you can have in this game. So you're missing out on that, and even if you feel you're currently in a solid position, every time you throw an HOH, you're risking some other player who you aren't closely connected to winning it, succeeding on those fronts, and turning the landscape of the game in their favor rather than yours. So going for those benefits is worth way more than the negatives of being seen as slightly more of a comp threat and maybe the nominee who stays being upset with you. Yet still plenty of people throw because of the fear of so clearly and visibly not being equal to the other players and how that can warp your perspective. Especially when you and your core group of allies go an extended period of time without ever falling out of power and being in true danger. It's yet another obvious parallel to people who have been privileged for so long that they can't remember what their earlier life was even like. They lose perspective on reality and make no effort to understand other people's situations. Those people, in real life and in Big Brother, will always inflate how hard they worked for what they have and how skilled they are in this current environment, and soon reach a point where they can't handle the smallest of losses. In their minds, me being remotely humbled would just be so undeserved. Other people being able to play the game just as I am would be incredibly unfair. And really, when you think about it, even though I'll remain in a perfectly comfortable position regardless, I'm the real victim here. Does that sound familiar? Anywhere. Yeah, that's what happens when you become conditioned to only knowing success and never having a real failure with consequences. Within a few good weeks in the house, it can happen, practically season after season. That stuff has always and will always be present in the game to some extent. That's people, that's psychology, that's real life. And again, a lot of people may hear that and think, why the hell would I watch this? I have to deal with these people at work or on the news or whatever. It's not fun. But in Big Brother, what keeps the human intrigue of this and alleviates the frustrating aspects is that the comeuppance happens much more often than it does in real life. Not always, but much more often. That's what the game is designed to do. You can go from the top to the bottom or vice versa in the blink of an eye. So you can actually reasonably expect that consequences will eventually meet those who deserve some, even if, at this moment, they're very powerful. The hierarchy of the game being as flexible as that also sheds light on how much having a more well-rounded perspective and varied experiences is to your benefit. Decently often, we've seen people go from being in power and annoying everyone to being knocked down below with all the peasants, and immediately they become so much more likable. Being low on the totem pole often brings with it self-deprecation, being more welcoming to these other house guests who are on the same level as you now, complete changes in demeanor, as well as their game sense. They generally come out of that loss having a better understanding of the house layout, what they should aim for now, and what their own faults as a player are. It's bizarre how quickly it can all happen, where fans can go from hating this person on their screens to loving them. But that's the value of a wider perspective. Because even strictly being on the bottom without any experiences of what it's like higher up, while obviously you're not likely to be as unlikable and egotistical as those who have always been on top, it can bring its own issues to your mindset. Like sometimes players who have never known true power and influence in the game end up growing content with their mediocre position. Even if an opportunity to change their position presents itself, They may play it safe and not really feel like they can afford to take a risk. They settle down where they are because it feels like there's no point to doing anything otherwise, even though there's always a point. Or in other cases, rather than wanting to flip the entire structure, this sort of powerless position brings about a greater selfishness where some players merely believe that one day they'll join the people already at the top of the tower. They can reject and foil any of the plans that the other bottom feeders make to improve all their positions at once, and instead just suck up to the power until they let them in and them alone. Of course, in those cases, as we see repeatedly elsewhere, they'll never let you in. If they already haven't been helping you whatsoever, and yet you help them anyways, then they don't need to change a damn thing. It's a delusion leading to self-sabotage. These are all cases where people's perspectives aren't formed in a box. Obviously, their environment and circumstances hold a major role. And the layer to it all that I find the most interesting, specifically tying to the higher end of a power structure and essentially absolute power corrupting absolutely, there's a particularly harsh result of playing this game, where you wrestle control from reality and actively adjust your perception of others in order to deal with your own guilt of having power over them. Being inside that house, you're so locked into your own perspective and are taught to not second guess it that much. Otherwise, you'd be blowing with the wind, since everyone is telling you different stories every other day. You'll lose stability, you'll go crazy. That's why when you want to influence someone on, for example, what nominations they should make after they just became HOH, you have to get in their ear early. It's easier to help build out and form their perspective on what path to take than it is to actively change their mind. That's a fact in general when dealing with people's opinions on anything. In Big Brother, if you only start working on that after they've been heavily leaning towards and probably vocalized to some people a certain direction, they're less likely to fully flip that because in a way, that would be admitting that they were wrong. Their initial instinct and thoughts would have been a mistake. And simply put, people don't want to admit that they're fallible. As the saying goes, it's easier to fool someone than it is to convince them they've been fooled, you know? They want to feel like they're right all the time because they're so gosh darn smart. And beyond the complications that brings to the strategic game and how much precision is then actually needed to turn a player against their allies, it also ties into what I touched on with BB2, where people are so drawn to not feeling like they're in the wrong strategically or personally that they will opt to rationalize their decisions and soothe their mind however they can.
I truly believe it's in my best interest to keep her here, but I don't want to be made a target because I chose to go against what the house wants.
Often, it is by pushing the blame onto this entity known as the house. They'll say that the house has decided you should go, so I have no choice but to fall in line with that. Who exactly is the house is rarely specified because the people actually in control at the center of everything use their whole web of relationships and influence to spread that narrative and social pressure throughout the cast without the source being squarely assigned to them. Of course, in the end, who you nominate, who you vote to evict, that is your choice and your choice alone, regardless of what the other players plan. And yet you often go to where the wind is blowing instead. Wanting others to be with you on that is reasonable. You can't play this game alone. You need allies. But people often fall in line with what the default choice was to their own detriment, because their mind will rest easier believing that they didn't actually have any agency in sending so-and-so out of the house. It's not what I decided, it's what everyone decided. Even the very first HOH that was ever crowned in the show started voicing his own guilt on the very first day that he gained that power.
It was a very dark reality that hit me in the face that I was going to have to pick the two people to be nominated to be evicted the first week, which is everyone's biggest fear coming on the show.
Are you all right?
It's good. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I was going to be directly responsible for killing the hopes and dreams of one person.
These feelings are inevitable, and spreading the blame like that is simply a way around it. But those cases where that's relied upon are contrasted by the final few rounds of the game, where a vote truly is one person's choice alone. There are no other voters backing them, no one else's opinion matters as much as theirs, there's nobody to share the blame with. It's just you standing in front of two people and telling one of them that you're sending them home. That's a struggle. People will go with their alliance through every backstab, every betrayal along the way. And then they have to do it alone, and it's a lot tougher. Occasionally, their whole mindset on the game changes at that point. Like especially in Survivor, as people near the finish, the idea of needing to take the best to the end may come up. To be the best, you gotta beat the best, and stuff like that. But it's such clearly warped logic when for the entire game up to that point, you've been voting out the best, i.e. the big threats, because that's how you beat them. You vote them out. That's the game. So why is that suddenly flipped on its head right at the end? I think a big part of that is the guilt. You see firsthand just how hard they've worked to be here. You may respect them and their gameplay more than someone else who's still here, and so you feel bad single-handedly taking that away from them. So that idea of the house eases players' minds so much, to the extent that in that season where Paul came back as the only returnee, the big alliance became almost cultish, where people surrounded Paul as this infallible figure whose morals were unshakable despite any visible contradictions. Like, for God's sake, there's a point where Paul convinces everyone to throw a running competition to a woman who broke her foot earlier in the season. These people would fall for anything. And this tight-knit, blind unification leads to them treating outsiders like,
all my dogs are barking, buddy! All my dogs are barking!
Woof! 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 How about you teach Cody the word liar? Because he lied to my face and so did you.
What type of big man are you?
You were safe, dum-dum.
But she's protecting the same guy that would want her out and you out, Raven.
Regardless of how Cody has acted in this game, this is harassment. It's pathetic.
There was always an next person lined up to push out, isolate, and blame all their problems on, while they were all essentially throwing their games away to help one person and demonstrating absolutely embarrassing behavior. But it's okay, because when everyone else is backing you, you believe you can wash your hands clean of your own actions.
I nominate you. I wash my hands of this.
It's a very dangerous and effective tool if you can control it. And obviously the idea of the house and the majority can make people complicit in things worse than just poor strategic decisions. But when the society of a cast does not really include that type of parachute, the point here that I've been trying to get to, but I'm very wordy, is that there's one way of relieving guilt that's always available. By far the most common, easiest, yet also least logical version of this is to heavily villainize whoever you're against in the game in whatever way makes the smallest bit of sense in your mind. It is very rare to go through an entire season of Big Brother and not at some point have a group of people who negatively pick apart every single innocuous action that this one person outside their alliance makes. Or, in general, push the narrative that all these people they've eliminated or are currently against, they were just bad people. They were all liars, snakes, and didn't deserve to be here because they were the bad guys. Unlike us, of course. We're honest and true. We're the good guys, the audience surely loves us, and we alone deserve to win. Now, obviously, this is dumb. There's the direct hypocrisy that can show up case to case where, like, there have been times where players are speaking like this, and in the next breath, bring up how they should keep lying to the current target this week and telling them they're safe until they're blindsided at the eviction vote for really no reason. Because, you know, that's what the good guys would do. But even outside of that already absurd level of disconnect, there are a few hard rules that anybody should know about playing Big Brother. Firstly, never, ever, ever assume that the audience loves you. There's usually not a consistent way of knowing, and the audience's preference can change on a dime, often dependent on who's the underdog at any given point. So even if you won some fan vote in week 3, there's a decent shot that America's no longer on your side come week 8. So never say that, and if anything, it's better to openly think that you're hated by America. Having humility is way more likely to endear you to them than talking about how beloved you surely are. Secondly, lying in this game that you all signed up for, that advertises itself as a game of deception, does not inherently make you a bad person. You can have lines crossed that you take issue with, like swearing on your kids' lives or on the Bible or whatever, but the blanket action of lying, because it's usually not the extreme cases they're dealing with, it's just, yeah, I'll keep you safe if I win HOH, followed by winning it and then putting them on the block. Doing that does not mean that person is evil, just as lying in a game of poker doesn't. Thirdly, you should especially acknowledge that prior one, because if you get remotely far in the game with any amount of agency over your own fate, it's inevitable that you as well will have lied. You'll try to rationalize it, move the goalpost, make excuses, but no, accept it. You will have lied, you will have snaked people. Whether it's a lot or a little, it will have happened. So you can't act like you're above it. There are no saints here. It's wild how far from reality players will go. And again, it's because they're so harshly limited to their own perspective. They're so stuck in their own heads that they will do anything to make that as comfortable of a place as possible for them to be. I really think that an effect of being in this sort of environment can have is that it kinda incentivizes you to remove your own empathy for other people. Like, the competitive aspect of the game makes it so you have to chop off a little empathy from the jump so that you aren't fully swayed by it every time you try to make a decision. The actual solution beyond that is to just accept your feelings for what they are. Acknowledge that I feel bad about voting this person out, but I'm gonna do it anyway.
I know that getting Jed out is the right move for my game, but it just still feels just icky, like voting him out. It doesn't feel right. I mean, the two of us have been in an alliance for most of the entire game, and so I know that it's the right move, but my heart is telling me that it's not.
When it makes you sad, let yourself be sad. Don't fight it. And that's tough. People don't necessarily want to do all that. So instead, they'll try to push these bad feelings away and even disprove them, to impressive extents. There's plenty of doublethink and cognitive dissonance as two contradicting beliefs try to coexist in one mind simultaneously. You'll hear people speak about another player like, well, they did nothing in this game whatsoever, so that's why they had no power and didn't deserve to make it as far as we did. But at the same time, they'll think, that player was doing way too much, trying all sorts of things to target us. That's why we essentially had no choice but to target them, and we shouldn't feel bad for voting them out. Essentially, the enemy is both strong and weak. Idiocy like that just to keep that space in your head nice and cozy. I thought about that villainization, us versus them mentality, a lot more when comparing these two South Korean strategy shows called The Genius and The Devil's Plan. Both very brainy shows, both created by the same guy, and both with similar types of people cast. The first of them, The Genius, did have alliances, and in some cases those groups did try to freeze others out of winning the match they were playing that round, arguably dirty tactics like that. However, through all 4 seasons, regardless of whatever dirty tactics are used, we don't really see those alliances villainize the outsider or see a group really run with the narrative that they're the good guys and so are the bad guys. Points where you don't feel pretty consistent respect among the cast is rare. And that's largely because on The Genius, the players get to go back home between each match that they play. Before needing to face off against these players again, they can go home, decompress, speak with friends and family in real life, and in some cases, since The Genius is more episodic with the games they play changing each round, episodes may start airing before the season itself finishes filming. So players can watch them, see what others were doing and what their perspectives were, and that all keeps those people further humanized to each other despite the fact that they're all competing, which is something the show very much aims for. Even in an episode where someone is squarely in the antagonist role for that episode's story, it goes out of its way to highlight one point of cleverness from that person and still give you reason to respect them while you root against them. So just the same, The Genius wants its players to respect its players. Other reasons are at play, of course. Potentially a healthier cultural view on this type of competition in Korea compared to America, for one. But also, these casts aren't filled with total strangers. They're all very successful in their fields, some of which being in media. So they would be more aware of the cameras, and there could be familiarity or even reverence between some players from their careers. but I still think being able to fully leave the game for a period of time is the biggest reason, because of the Devil's Plan. This is basically a spiritual sequel to The Genius. Similar formats, similar games, similar casting types. For our purposes, the key difference is that now, for as long as you're in the game, you're living with the other players, locked away from the outside world. And with just that change, suddenly, in an otherwise extremely similar environment to The Genius, after just the very first game of the season, people start slipping into the good guy, bad guy narrative. When you fully live within the game, with no way to truly decompress, but still being highly protective of yourself, you can forget that your competitors are no different than you. On Devil's Plan, it took a while before these players did eventually catch themselves and realize, wait, I'm just working against these people in the game. It's not deeper than that. I don't need to speak about them so negatively. Relating to this, one player talks about this thing called the doorway effect. How sometimes when you enter a room, you'll suddenly forget why you went there. Because once you pass through that doorway, your previous thoughts are replaced by new ones. In the Devil's Plan, the living area is completely separate from the game area. So this guy essentially explains it as something that reinforces adversarial dynamics in-game. Because when they enter the game room, it's like the positive feelings they have from the living area suddenly disappear. It's an interesting idea, but I think the reality is actually kind of the opposite. The two areas had a slight divide, but were still quite closely connected. They're still contained within the same bubble of the show. And as long as that's the case, there's going to be some crossover of the positive feelings from the living area and the negative feelings from the game area. In which case, negative emotions tend to win out. They can take a hold of you much more easily. But that slight separation between the areas, I think, is what lessened the crossover enough to leave room for your perspective to see, as they did, that these people aren't my enemies, they're just my opponents. Without that doorway, it would have kept a stronger hold. Because when you take that guy's idea and apply it to Big Brother, you would think it'd mean that this show, lacking a doorway effect, would have a more positive environment. But really, it's the opposite. Everything we've gone over so far is more toxic than what the Devil's Plan had. That's because the extent to which the game is self-contained and isolated has a much stronger correlation to the level of negativity. In The Genius, they all go home before the day is done and get a complete separation from the game. Not that toxic at all. The Devil's Plan. Overall self-contained from their normal lives, but clear separations are placed within that. Some toxicity, but it gets recognized and corrected. Big Brother. The house you live in has competitions played in the backyard, nominations happening in the kitchen, evictions in the living room, constant strategizing in the bedroom, conversations happening in the bathroom that could hypothetically be used against you at any point. The game is ever present, and as such, it can get pretty toxic. That is all so closely intertwined that you often don't even remember the difference between game feelings and personal feelings. You're too isolated within a single, narrow perspective to be able to easily parse it all out. They all blend together, letting the game feelings tend to dominate that combination, just as the prize money at the end constantly incentivizes. So in that sort of environment, where you're removed from the nuance of reality and other people's perspectives, and there are these gaps in your knowledge that you need to fill in yourself, but you aren't willing to engage in actual critical thinking and instead give yourself free rein to be as generous to yourself as possible, you end up in cases where, if you're working directly against someone who's in the game, and you can't leave to go to a completely different area to forget about that same person who you just enjoyed talking to in the kitchen, then your brain might simply turn that same person into someone who you don't like. There's no shortage of compelling layers like that to dissect from the tiny world that this game is played within. But just a reminder that that's all what we get when we're looking through the overwhelming amount of live feed content, seeing practically every conversation and the minutia to all of them. Meanwhile, for most of the audience who's just watching the edited show, this is what they'll usually be seeing instead.
She's just bent back like a baby bird getting fed by its mom.
Not only is he a turtle, but he is my life companion.
K-I-E-J
me, Jamie, you love me.
Otiv, the dopest DJ.
Fucking God. And look, like I said before, silliness isn't inherently bad here. I like a lot of the natural humor that you find from the house guests, especially from the stupid conversations that arise from the Big Brother house being one of the few places in the country where you'll find people who don't have access to Google.
I know my time zone, dude.
Okay, it's 8 p.m.
In the East Coast, it's an hour ahead of New Orleans.
Okay, it's 8 p.m. in California right now. What time is it in New
It
Orleans?
is 6 o'clock. Don't laugh.
Right.
You're making an ass out of yourself in front of America.
There's also this awkwardness that pops up here and there, most notably through the show's host, Julie Chen, who's famously very robotic in her mannerisms, and somehow after over 2 decades of hosting, the Chenbot barely knows how to interact with human beings. The only update her programming seems to have gotten is that she became really religious in recent years.
Keep being a child of God.
God is good all the time. All the time, God is good.
Like, it's weird. It's awkward. And perhaps just out of necessity, that's been embraced by fans. So campiness actively added in by the producers isn't completely out of place here. That should be in Big Brother to some extent. To me, it feels intrinsic to the show. I still like people getting slimed in their super nice clothes. It's still funny and should happen once per season. I love that now whenever a person is mentioned in a conversation, they'll cut to that person doing something weird elsewhere in the house. Once in a while, one of the punishments is a home run. Like, this is honestly probably where the producers put most of their energy. It's pretty fun making this guy toot a horn and announce a person's name every time someone has to use the bathroom. Or when an NPC is brought in to annoy someone for a whole day.
Oh! Oh, Brett, would you be in there and help me pick up all of my pills?
And with the costumes, one of the most clever, brutal, and most impressive strategic moves in the entire history of the show is based around someone convincing a man in a carrot costume to spare his life. I like that. It's just that along with some of this, I'd still like the show to maintain a little dignity. At least a little. Just a little. Just a little tiny bit of dignity. Maybe just like this much. I know this is easy content for the show to present and not have to think about, but please, there's a line someplace. I'm not sure where exactly, but somewhere between that time a woman was dramatically praying for God to forgive her enemies only to be interrupted by a woman in a bunny suit complaining about her outfit.
Can we get white belts in here? This is horrible.
I'm a slave to you, God. And that time 3 people snuck into the house to use a time laser. With the climax to BB2, I said the camp and serious sides were both present, but not in each other's way. Lately with Big Brother, the camp is in the way a lot of the time. Most of these exceptions I bring up are gimmicks that still work in tandem with the character and personalities of the players and what they're doing. Suri performing these weird superhero tasks isn't that funny. But Suri not bothering to hide her immense disdain for the producers who make her do this is funny.
It's been 78 days in this house. Jared went a while ago. Izzy's been gone practically from the beginning, it feels like. And now, to add insult to injury, you put me in this dumbass costume?
A good chunk of the humor isn't like that. The wackiness generally gets more childish and repetitive while also more domineering in how the show presents and advertises itself. Like a fart joke here and there is fine by me. But when the start of the final competition of the season, where the stakes are the highest they've ever been for these people who have lasted 90 plus days in this house, is fully based around giant farting unicorns? Like, what are we doing here? Is that really worth putting in at this moment? Why? Basically, this sort of stuff that's in a lot of competitions or punishments or DRs, it isn't one person being in a carrot costume during a dramatic moment. It's everyone being in a carrot costume. It's not a giant peanut butter jar, it's 5 giant jars of boogers. I don't know. The point is that the balance is off. This is why I don't show Big Brother to any of my friends. I think of the campiness as like the sprinkles on ice cream. Fun to have there. I like sprinkles, but you can't eat a cone full of sprinkles. You'll die. The main piece has to be the ice cream, which in this case is the strategic game and the human drama. When that part isn't made the priority, their presence within episodes is only ever in the most straightforward way, showing the bare minimum to how we get from person A becoming HOH to person B being evicted. Missing out on so much of the nuance, the back and forth, the personal drama, the fact that this one person who wasn't in the episodes at all was actually completely responsible for this happening. What really happened almost always holds more intrigue than what was edited and presented to a general audience. So in any season where the episodes are worthwhile, the feeds will be even more so, and just offer the overall more tense, dramatic, compelling viewing experience. I'd always advise to keep up with the feeds, though that can come in several forms. You don't have to necessarily be watching them 24/7. It's a big thing to keep up with alone time-wise. Plus, dealing with the whispers and the downtime and the feed cuts. That's not for everyone, and to be honest, I don't do it often either. So instead, plenty of people keep up to date with places like Reddit or that other place, where those who do watch everything discuss what's happening and post clips of relevant moments. Or over the years, there have been specific websites for detailed feed updates. Or now there's plenty of videos and podcasts of people recapping each day's events, assessing where the players all stand and what might occur from there. One of, if not the biggest, is Rob Has a Podcast, where Taron Armstrong has done daily updates for 8 straight US seasons and several Canadian ones in between.
It was day 1, day 2, day 4, day 27, day 41, day 57, day 86, day 99 in the house. And today is day 100.
Consistent, informative, and entertaining. That would be my recommendation for the best, easy way to keep up with the live feeds. Maybe even when the season is bad, because, when Big Brother is really bad, podcasts and fan communities at least let everyone commiserate and make fun of how terrible it is together. Big Brother fans, like any fandom, there's bad people there, especially since the show is basically on 24 hours a day for several months. There's a lot of investment that goes into watching that, so yeah, toxicity can put itself out in front. I don't know how many times fans have tried to get a player they hated fired from their real job. But there's still so much good in there, and truthfully, out of all the fandoms I've been a part of, I think Big Brother fans might be the funniest. Every season offers new opportunities for running jokes that they'll take further than anyone else and somehow have it still be funny. Joseph, (25), is a recent favorite, and I won't explain what it means. It's a big part of the experience that keeps people around even when Big Brother, yet again, fails to live up to its potential. And on that often repeated circumstance, there's one last aspect to the game that leads to these failures that's worth quickly going into before I start to wrap up, and that's focused on the competition aspect of the game. So, a lot of what I've praised about Big Brother is due to the fact that power can shift so easily in the game. The first HOH competition can be won by the big buff guy, but then the next one is won by the nerdy smart woman, then the older guy, then the ditzy person, the average Joe, etc., etc. The power position is constantly changing, thus generating more interest in how people strategically maneuver through the game. That's what you get when the competitions being played are generally testing these really random skills. Counting to exactly an hour, chopping onions, skee ball, estimating the quantity of an object in the given display, figuring out which of the players' faces have been mangled together in these monstrosities. They're weird, unorthodox tasks, so you're not likely to have the same person sweep and be able to win most or all of them against their competitors. The power moves around. For many seasons, that was the case. Seeing anybody go on a long winning streak, or even for the same core alliance to maintain power week after week, was very rare. Over time, this is basically flipped. At this point, it's rare to not see one person or a pair of players go on a big comp run each season, often down to the very end of the game. So then the power dynamics, especially towards the end, become very stagnant. Competitions, through having varied winners, should be something that helps keep the direction of the game fluid and make it so that the players themselves have to constantly be working to maintain the path of the game in the shape that they desire as their surroundings change. But there are many cases now where the competitions lean too far in a certain direction, and instead of forcefully opening new paths in the game, they limit the potential for social and strategic maneuvering. There are a few mistakes that lead to this issue. Firstly, competitions seem to have been leaning more and more towards the physicality aspects that really fit people will win. Comps have to have more running around, carrying big things, holding onto a zip line. Even endurance competitions, which used to be where the smaller people had an advantage, have seemingly become more based around forearm strength, as you suddenly have bigger guys repeatedly winning them. With others, even if there's a mental component with a puzzle or something at the end, it's seemingly not difficult enough to offset that and act as an effective equalizer. And that issue is expanded when you look at casting and see that the group of players each season aren't well balanced for that sort of thing. They cast a lot of fit men, maybe only one or two who aren't because, they want good-looking guys with abs to put on TV. But with the women's side of the cast, it's basically the opposite. You're going to get 2 or 3 women at best who are particularly athletic. So this creates an imbalance where I said before that power is briefly distributed equally after each eviction, when basically anybody could become the next HOH. In a way, that hasn't been as true lately. Just look at the tally for HOHs and vetoes won by men versus women in a recent season. A season where, not until the final 3, were there ever more men than women in the game, and yet it was still this imbalanced. Stats like that, which many seasons leading up to it share, don't lie. There's clearly a problem there. In Survivor, it's not even nearly as important for challenges to be balanced because immunity doesn't give inherent power the way HOH and veto does. But over there, they've pretty much nailed down how to balance these. Whether it's in tougher puzzles or weird carnival games or the endurance challenges, each emphasizing different muscles so it's not always just whoever has the biggest arms wins, the challenges there result in pretty varied winners. So I don't know why Big Brother alone has faltered in that aspect. I just don't think it should be the case where you put the token older person on this show and 75% of the time they're walking out into the backyard, seeing the competition, and immediately knowing, okay, there's no chance in how I'm winning this one. You theoretically want anybody to be able to gain power at any point in time. That's a huge part of what maintains intrigue in the game for both viewers and players. When that's only the case, maybe half the time, the overall game is too slanted towards specific players. No longer are HOH competitions almost always quizzes, and vetoes stuff like corridor, duck ball, going down a slip and slide, or drinking gross stuff and then playing croquet. Just all these tasks with such specific, unique skill sets that it's not immediately obvious who, if anyone, has a large advantage. One of the all-time great moments in the show is based around a competition that didn't really have any skill set. In the first All-Star season, you had one player return from the very first season of Big Brother. A man by the name of Chicken George. Yes, there's people with weird nicknames on the show, Chicken George, Swaggy C, Evil Dick, but I'm running out of time here, man. We can't go into this. He hadn't really played the game of Big Brother in the same way everyone else already had. So with him also just seeming like a nice but fairly uncomplicated older guy, people weren't thinking much of him in the game, and he could kind of feel the sentiment that he doesn't deserve to be there. So early on, he's nominated and likely to go home as an easy target. But George, more than anything, wants to prove himself and earn his place in the game. And when the veto competition happens, it's based around exactly that. Determination. How bad do you want it? What are you willing to do to ensure you win this one competition? George is there against all these big guys and goes as far as you possibly can in the competition. Without hesitation, he says, yes, I'll burn my clothes. I'll let the other players write and draw stuff on my body even if it means the show has to censor my chest for the rest of the episode. I'll paint myself blue. I'll shave my head. I'll give up my chance to play next week's veto. I will forego normal human food and instead eat this disgusting slop for the entire rest of the season. Just give me that veto.
This man is a badass.
The fact that this sweet older guy could wipe the floor with these muscly dudes, that's way more badass, heartening, and entertaining than run here, throw this, solve this puzzle. Now, for all I care, the competitions could just be a rock, paper, scissors tournament every time, since it's just not where the main intrigue of Big Brother is. But this shows they can have them be an entertaining part of the show while also being balanced so that basically anybody can win them. They could still do that because they did do that for years and years. That's clearly what should happen. Either vary up the competitions like that, or make your casting more squarely focused on athletic people. That way we aren't ever watching like, geez, I wonder who will win this running competition. One of the two women in their 50s and 60s? Or the 6-foot-something literal Olympian? Like, come on, it's just not fun. It's Big Brother rejecting its own strengths. And that hurts to see. So now we've gone over all these different areas of Big Brother that can majorly hinder the game and the show. And there are more of them. If I had even less respect for your time, then I probably could have had a whole segment on casting, but we're sticking with these. And what I want to do is lay out more clearly how several of these issues can coalesce to sour the show despite everything a season has going for it. I'm going to go into further detail on last year's season because Big Brother 25 is a crystal clear representation of this. The first half had so many good characters, so much strategic movement, several instances of one guy who nobody wanted to win a competition winning it. And it was wrapped around this player, Cirie, the well-experienced former Survivor player. She was masterful socially. She has natural charisma and care to make everyone trust her and get her and her closest allies in all of the main alliances without them even winning power. But her, as well as her allies, were a little sloppy strategically. So while they were successfully pinning each of these big alliances against each other while they sit comfortably in the middle, when it came to each eviction vote, they were constantly flip-flopping on who to send home and who they can trust. At some points putting in all the work to flip the entire vote against a person, only to change their minds and flip the entire vote back. Like to have the potential to practically snap your fingers and change who goes home each week. We've seen players with that level of power before, but they're generally focused enough to pick a lane and stay the course. They don't need to use their power in that way. To have a player who actually does it, who snaps their fingers to change the target again, and again, and again, and again, and again, it's insane. The season starts with weeks and weeks of their own chaos and paranoia, and yet, complete control. You begin to believe that they'll somehow never lose their grip on the house, but that even if they don't, it'll still be fun.
When it comes down to it though, I'm not depending on anybody else to save me. I want to save myself and Jared and Izzy and Felicia.
But the way it went was that the gradually bubbling effects of flip-flopping and some accelerating personal conflicts, plus a bad HOH outcome, resulted in the player closest to that core flipping on them, there being a huge argument, almost the entire layout of alliances in the house being exposed, and a new alliance being made to vote out one of Cirie's closest allies, and soon after, her other closest ally. The hierarchy had fully restructured after almost 6 full weeks of Cirie spinning them all around in circles, using nothing more than her words. It was the most I had loved Big Brother in a long time, basically since I had started watching. And the momentum was there for it to continue. But it grinds to a halt right there, and completely tanks in quality. It largely fails in 3 main areas. First, at the point where this guy was briefly voted out, a twist came in that made it so either him or the person voted out right before him would return to the game. And fine, whatever, we've done stuff like that before. But this time, instead of doing that right away and getting back to the game, they decided to have us wait. We do almost an entire week of absolutely nothing until next Thursday, when we do one simple competition that could have been an email to see which one of them goes back into the game. Gripping television that totally isn't just here to stall a week because executives wanted to make the season extra long after the writer's strike. Truly. Then, a while after that, there was another twist where the important part about it here is that it was possible for someone to win HOH 2 weeks in a row, potentially removing the key aspect of Big Brother's format, which is that power always shifts week to week. And of course, it's Big Brother, so Murphy's Law happens, and the same guy wins twice in a row. So those are both needless twists that disrupt the pace of the game by either pausing it completely, or basically taking what should have been the dynamics for 1 week and stretching them across 2 weeks. Next, the competitions felt like they were at their most imbalanced here. And like when you watch some of them in isolation, they don't immediately feel super slanted towards the guys, but this was a season that those imbalanced statistics that I showed earlier were from. It's tough to argue with those, and there isn't a great way for other people to offset that in the game when they gotta push against these twists too. First, this guy is winning everything, so you vote him out. Okay, success. Then these guys start winning everything, so okay, you vote out this guy. But nope, his buddy wins an advantage and saves him, so the eviction's canceled. Alright, no big deal. After a few more rounds, you just vote the other 2 guys out. But then one of them wins his way back in. Vote him out again after he already won some more, and then this guy wins 2 HOHs in a row, and then, okay, it's final 6, so you're just screwed now. The idea of just voting out the physical threats doesn't even work. It was like slicing the head off of a hydra. So that's just boring. It keeps a lot of power in the same hands. And that ties into the last issue, where because of that consolidated power towards the end of the game, we get a lot of the, we're the only people who deserve to win. We're the good people. We played with honor. Blah, blah, blah. It's that common annoying mindset, but there's no other shoe to drop. It just goes on for a few weeks until the end. You have the same people winning, then thinking they're strategic masterminds, even though the strategy each week just evolves to, this person's the next biggest comp threat, so yeah, they can go. And that leaves the people who showed so much skill at the strategic and social game being almost locked out of any situation where they can actually use those skills. Everything that was great about the first half was gone, completely sucked out by Big Brother's own decisions and a little bit of bad luck. Plus, for us viewers, just sprinkle on top of that the annoying parts we always have to watch, with the diary rooms and the general cheesy tone, because that's all still here too. Honestly, if you look closely, you can pinpoint the second the season dies. And that makes it truly a season of 2 halves, where Big Brother snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, as we should have expected. Like really, a solidly good Big Brother season should be the default. If you go through the early days of seasons 2 through 7, they're all good, most of them great. Later on, we still get home runs or triples here and there, but over time, the batting average just drops. With most modern seasons, like with Big Brother 25, there's a major flaw somewhere. The Achilles heel will get shot. BB23 is similarly pretty good in its first few weeks, then slows down more and more, never shifting momentum, albeit for interesting reasons. BB22, everyone was hyped for initially since we were finally getting a second All-Star season, but then it was something that I honestly struggle to think of anything redeeming about. BB21 has an interesting stretch in the middle, but was often run by very hateable people and just misses on panning out to a satisfying conclusion that could have redeemed more of it. BB20 is pretty fun for its first 2/3, but completely stalls out right after that. BB19 is boring, straightforward, and just kinda icky. They rarely seem able to hold themselves together the whole way nowadays. Be it the imbalanced competitions, or casting that brings in too many unlikable people or wannabe influencers, or twists that limit chances to disrupt the power structure, or the overly simplistic and immature edit, or the seasons just being way too long because the network wants to fill up more weeks. These are all aspects that are heavily ingrained into the show, yet heavily dampen what the game is. And it's particularly frustrating because what the show has been and could be again, is always trying to shine through. Being a self-hating Big Brother fan is not quite like other famously self-hating fandoms, like Weezer fans or Sonic fans. It's worse. With those, yeah, the fans try out whatever's released to them, but with each album or game, you get through a few songs, a few levels, and you can tell, okay, this is one of the bad ones, and then be done with it. Big Brother, though, is not randomly swinging between obviously great one season and obviously terrible the next. Because the great part is inherent. It's the core format of the game and the real-time, unscripted nature of the show. With those aspects, even if a season starts with a god-awful twist adjusting the format, you know that every time they've done that, they've dropped it after a few weeks and then returned to the standard format. So once we get to that point, there's potential again. Even if the competition seemed lopsided, you always think that maybe, just maybe, the person going on a run will slip up and lose. Even if most of the cast are unlikable people, the game is naturally putting some amount of pressure on those groups, so you can hope for alliances to crack and downfalls to happen. And if there's even just one person there who you actively want to see win the game, it's always theoretically possible that they could pull it off. Some level of hope, even if it's as small as can be. The fact that it's still plainly visible to everyone watching keeps you from completely leaving. Because for as miraculous and disappointing as BB25's turn from amazing to terrible was, you know that the opposite trajectory is just as possible. So what I'm going to be concluding with is an example of just that. When I skimmed over recent seasons that eventually or immediately lost steam, I conveniently skipped over season 24, because that's the inverse. So, one more time. Big Brother 24 starts off as many seasons do, with one core secret alliance forming early to seize control, leaving the outsiders to wander like loose electrons without a real understanding of the structure of the house. The few people furthest from the center of that structure are then more actively isolated, ridiculed, and thrown under the bus as those other people on the outs seek comfort in knowing that, hey, at least I'm doing better than that person. Decently common early setup that gives viewers more to root against than to root for, especially in this case where the treatment of the main outsider feels particularly unfair. This person was Taylor Hale, who I brought up earlier as a case where people's biases have shown themselves through the game. She herself is beginning the game acting as just a complete, total, normal person. To everyone watching the feeds at the time, all her actions were pretty innocuous. You wouldn't think twice about them. But little by little, a few of the other players start to twist these innocuous actions of hers in order to then project onto her cocky, aggressive, rude characteristics that just don't really exist. The one case I always remembered hearing about was when somebody dropped a piece of pineapple or something, and Taylor was there and jokingly commented, "Oh no, not the pineapple," and somehow that became retold as a super rude thing for her to say. Like what starts as people just saying they get bad vibes from her, builds up with these exaggerated cases like, Taylor demanded that I do my dishes, or Taylor called me fat, or Taylor's gonna blow up soon. It's weird, as if once people can sense that a bit of pressure is going against her, it's like, oh okay, well let me push that way too. And then it just snowballs from there. Maybe tying into that idea of the easiest way to make someone like you being to bond over your shared dislike of something. Because even one person who the entire time liked Taylor and was friendly with her and felt that this treatment of her was unfair, had a moment where in a group setting, several people were bashing her, and he joined in a bit and made fun of her too. And he said to the cameras right after that, I feel terrible about saying that, I don't agree with it, I'm not doing it again. But he felt vulnerable in his strategic position since I don't believe his position in the alliance had been solidified at that point. He just knew he needed to fit into the group more, and that was the way to do it. So if he for a moment did that consciously, plenty of those same people were doing the same thing subconsciously. It all feeds into itself to make one of the strongest cases of irrational villainizing that I've seen in the show. She was set up to be unanimously evicted in the very first week. being saved, but still no less of a house pariah when another player quit the game shortly before the eviction. And for what did become that core alliance, speaking in a strictly strategic way, that's kinda exactly what you want. The scapegoat remains. You can continue to tell people, hey, whoa, don't look up, don't look up. Look down. Look at Taylor. She's trying to ruin your game. Can't let that happen. Could you even imagine someone like Taylor getting to be in a better position than you? That'd be ridiculous. So unfair. You gotta vote her out. It leaves people distracted by the enemy of the week while being unaware of the reality of the situation. So if you're then one of the people actually in power, you can line up your other scapegoats and frankly cruise through at least the whole first half of the game, as so many of these early alliances have. However, immediate convenience only does so much. For a group to work, you want to also have legitimate trust and chemistry. It's best that they actually want to work together, you know? With this group, no, that wasn't the case. Michael realized from the start that he was the last person brought into the group that first week and is thus likely on the bottom of it. Him and Kyle are some of the few still questioning how Taylor has been treated, and in general mistrust is brewing as everyone has their own side alliances and close relationships and people on the board who they can influence. It's becoming apparent that the women in this group have more of those available, and are already utilizing them when one of their pawns on the board wins HOH and, rather than taking out Taylor, eliminates one of the guy's pawns. So if we stay the course, they're going to be the ones in the stronger position later on. A lot is bubbling from the guy's end of that alliance, and after only 2 weeks, they're ready to swerve. They're going to strike at that group and build something new. All that they need is for the right person to win HOH, and then they can change the whole course of it. Just kidding, here's a new twist. So what happens here is that everyone partners up with someone, and your partner is then the only person who you can be put on the block with. And this twist, its name doesn't matter. It's nothing. I'm not going to say it. I'm not.
Bestie, bestie.
Bestie, bestie.
Bestie, bestie.
Bestie, bestie.
Bestie, bestie.
Bestie, bestie.
Bestie, besties.
Fucking God, man, you try to help a show out, you know? Essentially, with this, you can just lock in your own safety for the foreseeable future by partnering with someone who you know you'll have the votes against. You know, like maybe a person who isn't in the big alliance that you already have. Yeah.
Although I am closely aligned with Brittany and trust her, I'm doing what's best for the Pose Pack Alliance. This may be a bit of a selfish choice, but if I'm sitting next to Brittany on Thursday, I should have 5 guaranteed votes, and that's huge.
This twist both limits the options for what moves every player can make each week, and also gives a clear temptation of guaranteed safety for those who already have power and knowledge of the game board. So that alliance that has been fracturing more and more and is just about ready to explode, well, they quickly sew themselves back together as they go along with the mutually beneficial option of partnering with the outsiders to all stay safe. And especially once one of those outsiders, Turner, wins HOH, it's clear that, yeah, we should stay the course. Just keep pushing the house pariah as the house target. Easy. It's all to be expected. To make change and take risks, you want to feel like you have stable ground on which you can see a ways in front of you and properly plan ahead rather than jumping in blind. Twists suddenly changing the game take away that stability and make them have to step way back to the safest spot and reassess. Right now, this group still doesn't want to work together, but the game is reminding them that they should work together. And that leaves the season in a spot where it could be no different than the worst of Big Brother. People stay in their spots just waiting for the guillotine and make the best of it. For them, it's just easier that way. Players reach this conclusion in different ways all the time. So now, after a brief moment of hope for things to get more exciting, you kinda have to resign yourself to how this is all gonna go. Essentially, almost everyone is in on the plan to nominate Taylor after the veto is used and send her home. Taylor's own partner, Nicole, is as much, if not more, in favor of it than everyone else. But there is some noticeable guilt in her building up, to the point that shortly before the veto competition, she actually has a change of heart and decides to win the veto to protect Taylor. Oh wait, no, that's incorrect, sorry. To the point that she and her ally Daniel decide to take those negative feelings and redirect them back at Taylor to an extreme extent, taking more innocuous statements she made and twisting them to imply that Taylor's maliciously trying to get Nicole to quit the game. Yeah. Cool.
Right off. You don't think America's watching all that?
This is getting tense now.
You don't think so? From here on out, do not speak to me.
I thought he was joking. Are you serious?
And this is all very different from the already poor treatment she's had. That's all been trashing her behind her back and people bonding through their mutual illogical hatred of her. Taylor herself has felt a level of isolation and believes that she's been doing something wrong as far as the game is concerned to get her into a poor position. But the idea of anyone here outright believing that she's a bad person, that comes as a painful shock to her. Especially in the environment of this house where Daniel is berating her and none of the other house guests are doing anything. They're just looking at the ground, enabling it all, leaving her to feel like this view of her is shared. So it's this crushing low point where the game is cruel. People can be cruel. Even the strategy is stagnant and boring. And it's another one of those, why am I watching this show kind of moments. This poor woman has been so badly treated for 3 straight weeks and is a target yet again. There's just no way she can bounce back from this. Right? 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 Right?
Congratulations, Taylor! You are the winner of Big Brother!
While so many forces were pushing the game in that negative direction and appeared to be succeeding, several other things are coming to a head around this point. And I'm not going to take my time and give all the context and background to craft all of it into a clean storyline. I'm just going to throw out a bunch of the events that are relevant. So at the end of the prior week, Monty had a conversation with Taylor that made him feel much more open to working with her after initially thinking that she was more likely to work with other women in the house. And Michael as well has been a Taylor supporter since him and Brittany have been friendly with her for weeks. Also, Monty is seeing more and more that he doesn't have the sway over Nicole that he thought he had in his core alliance. And that problem is magnified when Alyssa leaks to Kyle that there was a new alliance created earlier consisting of her, Nicole, Amira, Daniel, Terrence, and Jasmine. So Kyle, Michael, and Monty are like, oh, dang it, they can cut us loose anytime if they have that alliance too. And since Amira formed that alliance, it's becoming more and more clear that she's the big player to watch out for. But in week 3, she's showing more of her suspicion and distrust in outsiders like Joseph by always jumping in on his conversation to keep him from talking game, so she feels even more domineering. And since Taylor's being targeted by the whole house again, it seems even more viable that if you're the first to actually pull her into a real alliance, then she'd truly be loyal to you. So Kyle is going through all this stuff with Monty and Joseph and the HOH Turner, who isn't really doing much even though he's HOH, and they realize that as much as the pairs twist has constrained their options, there is one duo that they could still nominate and ensure that a shot is taken at the other side. And then the big confrontation between Daniel and Taylor happens. So in addition to all these strategic reasons that they found to risk the short-term safety that the twist gives them and exchange it for potential long-term gain, it also just, in general, feels right to not further enable this sort of meanness. So later that night, those 4 guys, plus Michael and Brittany, manage to pull Taylor upstairs where they lay out this whole situation and expose the original alliance that's been in control to instead swear new loyalties to each other, forming a new alliance called the Leftovers. The next part of their plan put into action is for Turner to act like he's still gonna nominate Taylor after the veto is used and send her home, but without warning, he will instead put up Terrence and Amira. So after that happens, this whole side of the house is blindsided, and from there, everything spirals. The rest of the Leftovers Alliance act just as shocked as they are. It even seems like Taylor didn't know what was going to happen, even she was nearly crying during the nomination ceremony. Everyone's fooled. So these people are scrambling, wondering, who knew about this? Did anyone know about this? Could Turner have done this on his own? No, it's not possible. I'm going to find out. And then they get spun around even more, because right before the renomination ceremony, Turner actually laid out to Daniel that he isn't putting Taylor up. So that once that information comes out, it casts suspicion onto Daniel and throws these people off the scent of the real alliance even more. So that happens, and Daniel and Nicole have an argument, and some people hear that Alyssa might be leaking stuff, and she almost accidentally talks about the original core alliance while Indy's still in the room, and Turner lies to people saying that only 2 other players knew what he was going to do, and the boys in the Leftovers are still acting concerned and lying to everyone and having fun putting on a performance while Taylor's just chilling in the sun, and it's all so fun. This level of scrambling and conflicting information and lying and confusion and dramatic irony, because at least I know I have the votes to stay, right? All happening at once is something that only Big Brother is capable of and I hope I'm getting it across. Even after that all dies down a little bit by the time we get to the eviction vote, it returns because they lie again. Legitimately, everyone outside the Alliance thought Amira was staying, but then she's gone, and the whole season is born anew. It's such whiplash. Legitimately one of the lowest lows I have seen as a fan of the show, as the season was nearly locked into a boring, predictable structure, while also just having a lot of this one-sided cruelty, to suddenly being among the highest of highs, as there's joy and chaos and justice. And the season overall doesn't ever fully lose steam after this. And the fact that Taylor manages to win, it's just the cherry on top. I've seen an embarrassing number of seasons of these types of strategy competition game shows. And across all of them, there are very few winners whose ultimate success ever felt so impossible the way her win did. When the whole house was against you right from the jump, and stayed that way for almost 3 whole weeks, winning just doesn't seem to be in the realm of reality. But that's the strength and the curse of Big Brother. As unlikely as something may seem, it's always still possible, and you know it. That's why it's worth it to keep watching. Through all the criticism that I've done here, the real conclusion is that Big Brother is amazing. The premise, game format, and viewing experience of being able to watch almost everything unfold in real time like a fly on the wall is so absurdly strong and unique within its field that it should be a home run almost every single season. The only part that absolutely needs to change each year are the people playing it. That's it. It's not like they're adding a bunch of new rules and twists to football every year. It's just football. And Big Brother only needs to be Big Brother. It naturally offers the drama, the conflict, the sociology, the strategy, the personalities, the humor, the unpredictability, the stakes, and the chicken costumes. Of course, the chicken costumes. It's all there. It's so simple. And yet we're somehow in a situation where I think of it as something that will only be great despite itself. Even right this moment, the 26th season recently finished, and this one as well was legitimately great. The cast was strong, the gameplay was unconventional and exciting, there were few dull weeks, the tide of the game shifted multiple times, there were actually more women winning competitions than men, which is very rare, and the main twist that lasted several weeks was actually, pretty good. I wouldn't be surprised if they brought it back, and I wouldn't be immediately mad if they did. All good signs for the future of Big Brother, and I'm not holding my breath for any of them. After 25 years of this, you'd be a fool to. I'm sure that there are people working on the show who care and understand this stuff and put real effort into fulfilling its absurdly clear potential, but they just don't have the larger sum of power here. When it comes to the big decisions, I have to think Big Brother is in the hands of the higher-ups in suits who put in little effort and largely just bow to network executives without a second thought. They don't listen to criticism unless it's from those executives, and thus let the show be stretched, bent, molded, and turned into spin-offs in whatever way serves the almighty CBS schedule. Any choices those producers actually make themselves might just be done to keep others from realizing that the show could basically be run by a monkey. To quickly hammer home this point for a third time, you can even look at Big Brother Canada for the same issue. After putting out a lot of good seasons, they managed to put out 2 excellent ones in succession. And it felt like they had everything figured out and perfectly balanced, and there would be nothing stopping the next season from... They got rid of the live feeds. They got rid of the live feeds. That sure as hell was an executive decision. And 2 seasons later, Big Brother Canada is canceled, so yeah. Until that overlapping issue is somehow solved, everything great about Big Brother, in the grand scheme of things, is at least fighting an uphill battle. But we end up never looking away because every small battle that it wins is too rewarding. Whenever there's a week where those cast to the bottom all come together to overthrow the power structure and humble the players who had been so full of themselves for weeks. Whenever there's a full month of chaos, manipulation, and multiple warring factions. Whenever someone pulls off a move so miraculous that everyone watching initially assumed it was doomed to fail. Whenever there's any moment that makes you appreciate what reality TV can be, and the fact that you just can't write this stuff, the beautiful defeats and ugly victories, it's all too good to give up on. I've been watching this show for 14 years. I still distinctly remember being in the kitchen eating some sort of apple cider ice cream type dessert and seeing on the TV a bunch of people playing fancy cornhole. Not exactly a concise representation of what the show is, but for one reason or another, it pulled me in and kept me watching the rest of the season. And of the 13 completed seasons since then, I would say that at least 5 of them were bad. Not all to the same extent, but you wouldn't blink at any of them being called that. A generous 8 out of 13 isn't a great score, is it? Like with most other shows, if they have 2 weak seasons in a row, then that's it. You're done. You're not watching anymore. There's no recovering. But for Big Brother, I haven't missed a season. I've seen every winner since then be crowned. Even in freaking Big Brother reindeer games, which was actually pretty good. Like, I know a Christmas version seems extra silly, and it is, but you gotta believe me, it was legit. Even after the worst that the show has to offer, there isn't a chance in hell that come next summer, I'm not excited for Big Brother to start up again. I think of it as like, Big Brother is a mystery box show. Its total carelessness removes any level of consistency or sound logic that can be used to predict how well the next season will be run, or any sort of general trajectory. It's just spaghetti on the wall. So no matter what came directly before it, when a new season comes along, anything could be inside that box. It has an endless range of possibilities in both a positive and negative direction. That's the situation that the show puts me in, which strangely is more true to what George Orwell wrote than anything else this show has done. Because with all of these issues in play, I feel like it's painful to say this, but impossible not to. I love Big Brother.